everyone, my name is Michael and today I want to dive into some Aspire stuff. So when you build distributed GraphQL setups together with Aspire, it's gonna change your perception of microservices and GraphQL. Before we dive in, if you like our content, please hit the like and subscribe button below the video. And with that, let's get started. So I have here a basically empty solution. I only have one project in here, and that's the catalog API. That's part of our eShop that we are at the moment building for our workshops. So the first thing I want to show you is how to set up Aspire and get already benefits out of it if you're just using Aspire together with Hot Chocolate as a single server. Because there is a wrong perception about Aspire that it kind of tries to replace Terraform or Pulumi or what have you. But actually, Aspire is an internal orchestrator for your development experience. So you get deep insights into your dev instances and also kind of can describe the dependency, the requirements that you have in development to other systems. And there is a second part to Aspire, which gives you a lot more robust service defaults. But let's dive in and discover what it is on the way. So if you get started with Aspire, the first thing you gotta do is check if you have installed Aspire. And you can do that by running the .NET workload list command. And I already have Aspire installed here, so I'm good. If you don't have, you can just do .NET workload install Aspire. So one thing here, if you would run that, it will tell you that you don't have enough permissions. So on Mac, just do a sudo, and on Windows, do the appropriately other thing like run as administrator or what have you. With that, let's dive into Rider, and I just built the project, so everything looks fine. We can have a quick look at it, so let's run it. Let's go to Banana Cake Pop, create a new document, and then we're gonna dive into the schema reference here. Let's go for the column view, and you can see that we have here basically the catalog of our webshop API. So we have products here. We can dive into products, from products into brands, and so forth. We can also query that. So I can write a simple GraphQL query here by going into products, then nodes, and then we go, for instance, for the product name and the brand. And then I can run that and I get the result. So this is awesome, works fine. So let's have a look at how we can bring Aspire into the mix and what we can take away from that. So back in my project, I can now add a new project here. So Aspire consists of multiple parts. As I said, there are the service defaults. And that's actually the first thing I want to bring in here. So I go down here to Aspire, and then I say, I want to add new service defaults, and I'm going to call them eShop service defaults. So we add that. And then when we look at the service defaults, it's basically a bunch of extension methods that adds good stuff to our service, like OpenTelemetry, like health check endpoints, and also here something called service discovery. What service discovery is, I will show you when we put the app host in the second component of Aspire. So this thing we can just reference with our catalog API, and then we're gonna use these service defaults. So we go up here and say add service defaults, and then we are good to go. The other part of Aspire is a lot of drivers that take over these service defaults. Like here we are using the DB context that comes standard with Entity Framework, right? We are using like NPG SQL, and now we're going to swap that out for the Aspire version. So we are looking here for Aspire NPG SQL, and then we find already the new driver here, and we are picking here version 8, preview 4, and then we're going to install that. With this installed, we can swap this guy out. We can chain it up here and say add NPG SQL DB context. This is the DB context we want to set up. And then we can just define here the connection name. So we don't need to bother with configuration actually anymore. This will be resolved by the Aspire host that we put in a second. So for now, let's just wipe this one out. And let's say we're going to call this the catalog DB. Okay, with this, we are almost ready with the Aspirification here. We just need to add one more thing, and that are the default endpoints. So we're going to say map default endpoints. And if you ask yourself, what are the default endpoints here? Basically health check endpoints that you have here. Like there's a health endpoint if everything is fine, and we have an alive endpoint, which basically says I'm here, but maybe I'm not working fully. But at least you have this ping, right? You have the ping and everything is fine. Okay, with this, we have the project set up with the service defaults. And the next thing we're gonna add is the Aspire app host. As I said, there are two components to that. You could even use these two together without using the app host. So we're gonna select here app host, and then we call it eShop app host. Then we're gonna create that, and then we go in here. So this guy is meant to describe the requirements that your application has to other systems, as well as describe the requirements that your applications within your realm have with each other. So let me give you an example for that. So I'm gonna add here the catalog API, and then we're gonna introduce the catalog API as a configuration to the app host. The app host is also an orchestrator, so describes the configuration dependencies, so the requirements between these application parts, but also is an orchestrator that will resolve all these dependencies and start your service up. We're gonna see that in a second. So I'm using the builder here, and I'm gonna say we're gonna add a project. So what Aspire does if we add like a project to it is generate a couple of classes. So we can kind of avoid having some paths that we have to refer to. Instead, we just reference here code, and this class represents this project here. And then I can give a logical name to my application here, and we call that the catalog API. So this catalog API we already saw has a dependency, and the dependency is to a database. So we're gonna introduce here a database, and that is a Postgres database. So I'm saying add Postgres, and I'm calling the database Postgres. Not very imaginative, but let's go with it. So we have Postgres set up here. Next, we need a database. And we more concretely need the catalog DB. So I'm taking Postgres and say I need a database, and that is called catalog DB. And now we can take this and go here to our project and say with reference. So I used here C# to describe actually my environment a bit. So I say here basically there is a web project, and that's the catalog API, this guy here, and it needs a database, the catalog DB, and this catalog DB is created on the Postgres that we issued. I also can say that I maybe want to inspect my Postgres at runtime. So let's also add a pgadmin to it. That's often what I do when I configure a local container with Docker Compose. I issue here basically a Postgres admin with it, so I can inspect the database. In this case, we just say we want a Postgres, and we also want a pgadmin with it. With this all set up, we can start it. So we cannot start our catalog API directly. Instead, we select here the app host. So you can see here eShop app host. And then we're going to start our orchestrator. Our orchestrator will configure our environment here. And then you can see here in our dashboard that our system is there, and we have a Postgres here. We have a pgadmin here. We could dive into the pgadmin. And then we can see here our Aspire instances. So if we look into our databases, there's a catalog DB. We can go into that. We can go into the schema. And then down here, we can see the tables that our project issues, like brands, product types, and products. So everything seems to be in order. So what we also can do is actually have a look at our catalog API. So in our catalog API, we can actually check if everything works. So we run it, and yeah, our service is there, and performs well. Next thing we can have a look at is the dashboard here. So we have a ton of information. It's like we could look at the logs that our service exposed. You can see here the SQL we actually issued. So we selected some brands here in this case, but we also have, apart from the standard log output onto the console, we have the structured logs and the traces. The traces are really gold, right? We can go into one of these traces and then see really the request structure that we have here. In this case, we have the general request to our backend. And then we have first one Postgres query and then the other. We could also have a look at that and then see even the SQL we did here. Apart from that, there are also metrics, and this is all coming from OpenTelemetry. We could select the catalog API and then see what requests went through, how many active requests are there at the moment, none, because like I just did a couple and then we stopped. But there are also other things like the commands that went through our DB provider and things like that. So Aspire already gives me a lot of telemetry right and my debugging experience. That means now that I just have a Stay server here, I already kind of see what is actually happening without debugging my thing. On top of that, I can actually also discover what configuration settings this service has. So I can dive into that, and from the things that I configured in Aspire, I already can see that, for instance, there are some ASP.NET Core environment set, OpenTelemetry variables, and up here is also my connection string for my database, and I can also have a look at what that looks like. So this gives me like this cockpit around my debugging experience and really turns the light on in this solution. So let's get back and build a bit more into that. So this is just a single service. Where it really becomes nice is when we put our Fusion integration into it. The first thing we need to do is add the Fusion package here to our app host. So we're gonna say hotchocolate.fusion, and then we take here Aspire, and we're gonna install that into our app host. So Fusion does a lot of composition, build time composition. So we need to chain that into our composition pipeline here. So we say build.compose, and with that we have integrated the Fusion build composition into our Aspire setup. But at this point it actually does nothing because we don't have a gateway. So in order to change that, we're gonna add here a new project. And that project is actually a Fusion Aspire gateway. Fusion Aspire gateway is just a gateway with a couple of configurations that we did to it. So let's call that the eShop gateway. And then we add that. Then we go in here. And the first thing also here, we need the service defaults. So we also get nice telemetry. And then we add the service defaults in here. So builder add service defaults. And also we need the default endpoints. So app.map default endpoints. And then we're actually good to go. Let's configure our thing in the app host. So we're gonna reference that project. And down here, we're gonna just say builder.add Fusion gateway. And the Fusion gateway is in this project. And we just call it gateway. So, but this gateway at the moment doesn't do anything alone. We actually need some subgraphs to compose into it. So what we're gonna do is capture the project that we have up here, the catalog API. And then we say down here at our Fusion gateway with subgraph and pass in the catalog API. So with this simple step, we already have a working gateway. We can just compile here. And you will see already in the compile step that we are exporting the schema from the catalog API and we are composing the Fusion graph. And this is really plug and play. We can just play here, go to our overview here. You can see our gateway is now working. And then we go here to create document. And then we can have a look at our schema. Let's refresh it. Go to our schema and we can see the exact same schema that we have on our downstream service. So we wrote this query here and then we're going to execute that. And then we can also have a look at the query plan actually, what is happening. So I enable the query plan on our gateway. And then we can see that we are fetching here from the catalog API and then we are composing the result. So this is nice. So let's actually go back to our dashboard and we can dive into our traces. And then down here, you can actually see the request we did that went from our gateway. We did a post to our catalog API and then we did 2 SQLs down here. So let's make that a bit more enticing and actually add another subgraph into it. And then we're gonna merge these 2 GraphQL microservices or GraphQL domain services with each other. So if I want to do that, I just add a new project here, and that is a standard GraphQL server, and we call that shipping. And let me quickly reference here the service defaults. We're gonna add our service defaults to this service. Also, we map the default endpoints. Then let's kick out the types that we have here, that the demo types, book and author. And then we're gonna come up with something new, and that is actually our product. So we introduce here a class called product. Let's make it a record. And this actually has a string ID. And then we have down here a field shipping estimate, which is in decimal, and we're gonna return 1. And up here, we're gonna introduce a field, and we call that get product by ID. And into that, we feed the ID that we have here. Awesome. This service would work on its own. It doesn't do a lot, but it aims to extend the product type on the other graph. So we kind of have here a product type that brings new fields into the other product type. This gonna not compile, so this will raise actually a compile error, but that's exactly what I want to show you. So now I'm integrating here another subgraph, and let's call it the shipping API, or let's say builder, and we're gonna add that here to our gateway. So with subgraph, say shipping, and then we compile. So let's stop that. So we get compile time integration here. So we get an error that actually I created a product ID field that doesn't match the original product ID field that we have in the catalog API, because in the catalog API, if we go to our product, it actually has an int ID. So we cannot merge this type. You don't have to start your service to get this error. You just compile and you get the error. And this is built into the .NET compile process. So we can now go here back to our shipping service and actually fix this. So we can introduce here the ID as an int, and then also do that here. And now my service actually will work. I can compile that. You can see here we exported the schema from the catalog API, exported the schema from the shipping API, and then we composed this graph. The whole process takes 3 seconds. Even with larger solutions, you maybe have a composition time of 6 to 10 seconds, so it's really, really quick. And then we can start this thing. You see everything is here up and running. We can go to our gateway and then just refresh our schema and just query our shipping estimate. Done. And you can see our query plan just changed. And now we go first to catalog API, get all the data. From the catalog API, we export the product ID, and then we send that to the shipping API to get the mergeable product part here, and then we compose that into each other. You can also see that in a textual representation down here. This is the catalog API request that we have, and then we overfetch here for the ID because we didn't ask here actually for the ID. Then we provide this variable here to the next steps, and they're gonna pick that up and feed that into their request and then produce here the shipping estimate. So very neat to see that also transparently working together. So let's go back to our API and actually extend on this step a bit. So we go back here, and actually like this, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Just to get the ID and then come up with the shipping estimate is most of the cases not feasible, right? So what we're gonna do is actually require some data. So we actually need the price from somewhere else in our data graph. We don't know which microservice it's on, but we know it's on product somewhere. So we're going to declare it here and say we need the price. And actually that's a decimal. And then we do a multiplication. We do the shipping. It's basically the price times 20%. So we take 10 to 20% of this price as a shipping estimate, something like this. And then this should work. This guy needs to come from somewhere else, I said. So we're going to introduce here another GraphQL document. This actually all is preview, so that's why we still have to add here a GraphQL document. Soon you have annotations in .NET for that. But anyway, we're going to introduce here the schema.extensions.graphql. Then we restate here the field that we want to manipulate, and we express here a requirement. And we say we require price from somewhere in the graph. With this set up, we can simply compose. And the compilation told me now that actually there's something wrong. We have to provide the field argument here for our require directive. So again, like we can compile, all this stuff is compilable and we get compile errors. They're not perfect yet, so we are still polishing a lot here. So I'm done, it compiles. That we get here a lot of red squiggles. That's actually Rider that tries to reason about all the schemas it finds in the whole solution and tries to merge them. And gets confused here. So we're gonna just start this thing and go to our gateway and then refresh the schema. So we added an argument, but this argument is not here. It's resolved implicitly by our gateway. We can just run our query. What happens now is actually what we do is we inspect the query. We know there's a requirement, and then we are exporting here 2 things. You can see we are exporting the product price and the product ID. And that means if we look at the result, that we get here a shipping estimate based on the price. Doesn't make sense. Should just show you the capabilities a bit. So if we add the price as well here, then you can see that's roughly 20% of the price we had. So this is working really fine. So this gives you a glimpse on what we are working on. There's so much more that we are at the moment putting into version 14 of Hot Chocolate and Fusion. And together with Aspire, it becomes so nice to work with it. It makes it so transparent what's happening between these services. And with this compile time integration, you suddenly see immediately the moment you hit compile or you hit play, what is wrong with your subgraphs or what is wrong with the type merging or whatever. So what do you think about Hot Chocolate version 14 combined with Aspire? Sound out in the comments. Before you leave, please help our project to grow by giving us a GitHub star. A GitHub star is the easiest way you can give back to open source projects and help them grow and reach more people. With this, I'm out.